Something really exciting has been happening. You know, I was talking all about how they planned to take out the Ayatollahs in Iran as the last terrorist group that'll be reigning there, and replace him with the former Shah of Iran, who was the king of Iran, his son, Reza Pahlavi, so that there will be the crown prince taking place of the leadership in Iran. And they believe that when he goes back into power, it will do away with all the terrorist activity and bring a peace to the Middle East, because truly it is Iran and her proxies that have been creating terror for about 45 years now. But I was talking about the prophet Daniel, and the prophet Daniel, you really have to understand, in order to understand the end times events, you have to understand as if you're transporting yourself into Daniel's time frame and being in Babylon and praying what he prayed. And what he was praying for was the restoration of Jerusalem. He was praying for the restoration of God's holy Mount Moriah, and the restoration of the temple. So in the last days, when the rightful heir, which is King Yeshua in the tribe of Judah that Daniel was in the tribe of, he was a prince of Judah, he sees the rightful heir taking the scroll that he sealed up the scroll until the times of the end. And then it's the rightful heir that unseals the seals, which are judgment seals. But the prophet Daniel is not talking about America. He's not talking about all of these other things that people project from the West as though they're involved in it. This is having to do with his own people and his own monarchy being restored in the last days. So something really exciting happened just about a week ago when I was watching Expedition Unknown, and Josh Gates rappelled down this cliff face that was in ancient Sela, and it is in modern Jordan. Well, it is this very sheer cliff face. And so he was rappelling down the cliff face to look at this big rectangular inscription that's on the cliff face, carved in it. This had already been excavated by the Sela Archaeological Project in 2018. And so I was really freaked out when Josh was saying, well, he went and he used this scanner to scan the inscription, and then they took it back and analyzed it, and when they put it on the computer screen, of course, the detail was pronounced, and they were able to see the words on it, and a chill ran through me when he read the inscription, and it said, Nabonidus, king of Babylon. I was like, whoa, you're kidding me. So he was dangling. He actually rappelled down there, which had been done before by the original excavators. And he rappelled down and he was hanging in front of the inscription, not knowing that it said King of Babylon. So I was just thinking to myself, you know, as a big research person, I was looking him up and trying to associate the time frame of when he ruled and when he lived to Daniel's time period and some of the people that Daniel was dealing with within Babylon and Persia and all of that. And I was just talking about that the prince of Persia opposed Daniel, and this was said to be some sort of spirit of the kings of Persia that opposed him. Considering that they're going to put a king on the throne of Judah in the end, and the person that sits on the throne in the third temple is going to oppose and exalt himself, I find it very interesting that it was the prince of Persia that was opposing the prince of Judah. So will that be the same person, or somebody working with that crown prince that becomes king, and it's another king, which I've already showed all the stuff about King Charles that out of my own information, but Nabonidus inscription at Sela is what Josh Gates was showing, and this was truly, I mean, I got a chill running down me when, you know, you're hanging in front of an unknown inscription and suddenly it says King of Babylon in front of you. And those people were not nice rulers, believe me. But the Sela Archaeological Project says in the 6th century BCE, the Neo-Babylonian king Nabonidus inscribed imperial propaganda on a cliff at Sela, a mountain fortress in modern Jordan, after conquering the site, and both his conquest of the Edomite fortress and his carving of a monumental inscription displayed his military might. Sitting on top of a 600-foot tall mountain, Sela was well fortified. A variety of natural rock formations, walls, and towers encircled the summit, and a large gatehouse guarded the only entrance to the site, reached by a single staircase carved into the cliff's eastern side. Nabonidus led an army up the staircase and defeated the fortress, and then he carved a 10 by 6.5 foot inscription 300 feet above the ground, halfway up the cliff. This monument contains a weathered inscription. It depicts of a moon, solar disk, star, and King Nabonidus wearing a long robe and conic crown and holding a staff in one hand, although the text of the inscription is only partially preserved. It likely commemorates his victory. So this is the Sela Archaeological Project about the Nabonidus inscription, and this is a picture of it. Now, I already told you that the crescent moon god was known as Sin, and Sin is who they worshipped with the golden calf, who had the crescent moon horns on the scarlet-colored beast, which is a red heifer overlaid with gold. But I decided to do some research on Nabonidus to see how he was connected to the time frame of the prophet Daniel. And man, I got the shock of my life. Because we know in the book of Daniel that Daniel was dealing with someone who is, a lot of times they call him Belshazzar, but it's really Belshazzar. So I'm going to call him Belshazzar because that's his name. It turns out that Nabonidus was the father of Belshazzar. And this is stunning because he's dangling in front of this inscription of Nabonidus, Belshazzar's father, who dealt with the prophet Daniel. And shockingly, the program dropped the ball and never mentioned any of those connections whatsoever. I discovered this in my own research and thought it was too important to not tell the story. So I did some research on these things, and Nabonidus has typically been characterized as attempting religious reforms in Babylonia, wishing to raise the moon god Sin to the status of supreme deity, and demoting the Babylonian national deity Marduk. The elevation of Sin was similar to how the deity Inanna was elevated to a prominent position in Uruk during the time of the Akkadian Empire, more than 1,000 years prior, or how Marduk had originally been elevated in Babylonia under Nebuchadnezzar I. In contrast to these earlier successful exaltations, the attempt to elevate Sin met with failure, and this failure is because the exaltation of Sin met with considerable opposition within Babylonia itself, and because the invasion and conquest by the Persians put an end to the political means with which the exaltation could be completed. Now, it's really interesting that the crown prince of Persia, Reza Pahlavi, is a Shia Muslim. Shias believe that the succession of Muhammad should have been his cousin and his family members, whereas the Sunnis, which the Palestinians are Sunni, and they believe that a caliph was the successor, Abu Bakr. In addition to building inscriptions, the verse account of Nabonidus also alludes to attempts to establish Sin as the foremost god of the Mesopotamian pantheon. Determining that Nabonidus was Belshazzar's father was shocking to me. And I just said, whoa, because this just proved that he lived. An elderly courtier who would rise to become the last king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. There are various theories concerning Nabonidus' origins and, in turn, what claim he had to the throne, since it's not made clear in any contemporary sources. It is possible that Nabonidus was married to one of Nebuchadnezzar II's daughters. Not only would such a connection explain Nabonidus' rise to the throne due to his being a member of the royal family, but it would also explain later historical traditions in which Belshazzar is described as Nebuchadnezzar's descendant. In the book of Daniel in the Hebrew Bible, Belshazzar is referred to as Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. It is alternatively possible that later traditions of Belshazzar being a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar are derived from royal propaganda, and that there was no connection to the previous ruling Chaldean dynasty. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus names the last great queen of the Babylonian Empire as Nitocris, though that name, nor any other name, is not attested in contemporary Babylonian sources. Herodotus' description of Nitocris contains a wealth of legendary material that makes it difficult to determine whether he uses the name to refer to Nabonidus' wife or mother. But William H. Shea proposed in 1982 that Nitocris to be identified as the name of Nabonidus' wife and Belshazzar's mother. The most important sources for the name of Belshazzar are the Nabonidus Chronicle, the Cyrus Cylinder, and the verse account of Nabonidus, which despite its name was commissioned by the Persian conqueror Cyrus the Great. As all of these ancient Babylonian documents were written after Babylon was conquered by the Achaemenid Empire, and they are biased in favor of Cyrus and against Nabonidus and Belshazzar. So the current crown prince of Persia has met with Netanyahu, and they are making plans to put him back in power and take out the Khomeini Ayatollahs over there in Iran. And that is currently what you are witnessing. So they're starting with military, and now they have a reason to go after these people because Israel was attacked. And so here we've got the crown prince of Persia that will get back into power and said that he wanted to make the Cyrus Accord with the Jews. And that means to rebuild their temple, just like Cyrus made the decree. So that's an astonishing development. Belshazzar's father was proclaimed as king in May of 556 BC, and by the end of June, tablets recognizing Nabonidus are known from across Babylonia. Belshazzar's father came to the throne as a result of a conspiracy that saw the deposition and murder of the previous king, Labashi Marduk. And sources suggest that while he was part of the conspiracy, Nabonidus had not intended nor expected to become king himself, and he was hesitant to accept the nomination. After the accession of his father, Belshazzar emerges in the sources as a prominent businessman and the head of a wealthy household, a role that was typically not picked by members of the royal family in the Neo-Babylonian period. Now they have this clay cylinder that records the restoration of Sin's ziggurat at by Nabonidus, and also asks him to protect Nabonidus and his son Belshazzar. And this cylinder is from Iraq. And they also have an administrative document, like a cuneiform clay tablet, dated to the 24th day of Kislevu in the 11th year of Nabonidus, king of Babylon. And it mentions a slave of Belshazzar, which is Belshazzar, son of the king. Although Belshazzar is acting as a regent, the formal date shows that Nabonidus is still the reigning king from Borsippa, Iraq, is where this clay tablet's from. Nabonidus left Babylon in May of 553 BC to campaign in the west. He eventually led his forces into Arabia, conquering several cities, including the city of Tema. Nabonidus made Tema his provisional seat, and he would stay there for about a decade, not returning to Babylon until September or October of 543 or 542 BC. October 543 BC is the return date most supported by surviving Babylonian documentation. The purpose for this prolonged stay, effectively self-exile in Tema, is unclear and debated. During Nabonidus' absence, Belshazzar was put in charge of the administration in Babylonia, and though this period has often been dubbed as co-regency, Belshazzar never assumed an official title. The verse account of Nabonidus, a biased document probably written after Nabonidus was deposed by Cyrus the Great, states that Nabonidus entrusted Belshazzar with the kingship. So that's a truly astonishing thing, because Cyrus the Great was the one who made the great decree with the Jews to return to Jerusalem and build the temple. But there are no records of Belshazzar assuming the royal title, though it's clear that Belshazzar, during his father's absence, assumed many responsibilities typically only held by the king. Several prerogatives were also kept solely by Nabonidus, and these include Belshazzar never assumed and was not allowed to use the title of king, which was reserved for Nabonidus. Throughout the period of his father's absence, even though he was the effective ruler of Babylonia, contemporary documents continue to refer to Belshazzar as the crown prince, literally meaning son of the king. And the only sources that refer to Belshazzar as king rather than crown prince are later Greek and Jewish sources that do so erroneously. And though he is never identified as king, several contemporary Babylonian documents refer to both Nabonidus and Belshazzar as my lord, a designation usually reserved for the king alone. Belshazzar was not allowed to date documents after his own regnal years. No documents are dated to the reign of Belshazzar, and no documents mention both Belshazzar and Nabonidus as if there was a formal co-regency. Instead, documents from the period in which Belshazzar was regent continue to be dated after the years of Nabonidus' reign. Belshazzar was not allowed to officiate and oversee the Babylonian New Year's festival, which was the duty of the king. The festival was not celebrated throughout Nabonidus' absence, as Belshazzar was not allowed to take up the king's role in the ceremonies and only resumed after Nabonidus returned to Babylon. Belshazzar is not mentioned in building inscriptions, which usually mention the king responsible. Even during the period of Nabonidus' absence, he's mentioned in building inscriptions in Babylonia as a builder and excavator, as if he was actively ruling at the time, with no known references to Belshazzar. In some cases, such a ritual performed at the temple of Buene in Sippar, inscriptions attributed to Nabonidus, while surviving letters prove that Belshazzar was responsible. Though Belshazzar's authority was thus limited, he also was allowed and assumed certain royal responsibilities, and these include contemporary documents record literally remains leftovers from food offerings presented to statues of deities being sent to both Belshazzar and Nabonidus during the regency. Otherwise, Rahatu is only recorded as having been sent to kings, receiving the remainders of cultic food having been an exclusive right of kings. And we know that Nebuchadnezzar tried to get Daniel the prophet, the prince of Judah, to eat his food, which was offered to these false deities. And Daniel refused to eat it. In Babylonia, temples usually carried out offerings to the king, such as sacrificing a specified number of sheep. Prior to and after Belshazzar's regency, surviving texts only contain references to offerings to the king, i.e. Nabonidus. But during the period of the regency, there are references to both offerings to the king and offerings to the son of the king. The events that transpired in Babylonia during Belshazzar's regency are not well known, owing to a lack of surviving sources. It is clear that the New Year's festival was not celebrated and that there was concern regarding the rising power of the Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus the Great. The Babylonian chronicles describe the actions and conquests of Cyrus in detail throughout Belshazzar's regency. As Nabonidus stayed in Tema continued, Belshazzar became acutely aware of the threat presented by the Achaemenids, as he is recorded as having expended resources at projects in Sippar and nearby defenses. In 546 BC, Cyrus the Great crossed the Tigris to invade Lydia, ostensibly a Babylonian ally. And though Belshazzar took up a defensive position with his army, perhaps expecting a sudden Persian attack against Babylonia itself, no aid was sent to the Lydians, who were swiftly conquered by Cyrus. It is possible that Belshazzar had campaigned against the Persians on Lydia's behalf a year prior, in 546 BC. The fall of Lydia in 546 BC meant that the Neo-Babylonian Empire was now effectively encircled by a stronger kingdom, which had nearly unlimited resources at its disposal. Kind of like what King Charles III said, with unlimited funds at his disposal, he shall be able to do what he pleases. It seems likely that skirmishes along the border were frequent from then until Babylon's fall. It is possible that a noteworthy return to Orthodox Babylonian religion following early attempts by Nabonidus to exalt the moon god Sin over the traditional Babylonian supreme deity Marduk can be attributed to Belshazzar. It may even have been Belshazzar who convinced his father to stay away from Babylonia in the first place, fearing a confrontation with the Babylonian oligarchy and clergy over his father's religious beliefs. And it's probable that Nabonidus, a reformer, and Belshazzar, apparently more religiously conservative, did not see eye to eye in religious matters. Belshazzar appears to have worked to restore Marduk's status in his father's absence. And upon Nabonidus's return to Babylon, Belshazzar was demoted from his administrative responsibilities, and officials he had appointed were dismissed. Nabonidus also had certain inscriptions made during this period of the regency, edited to add prayers urging Belshazzar and the people of Babylonia to accept and receive Sin's blessing. So here's what happened with the fate of these people. Regardless of any potential animosity between Nabonidus and Belshazzar, Belshazzar retained the status of crown prince and intended successor, as a handful of documents still reference the son of the king. Otherwise, his status and position after Nabonidus' return is never made clear. The sources also do not make Belshazzar's location clear, but it appears that he was stationed some distance away from Babylon, but that he also was no longer in Sippar. And he had stationed himself in 546 BC out of fear of Cyrus. One possibility suggested by Paul Alain Bolio is that Belshazzar was put in charge of Babylonia's defense and was moving with the army along with the northern and eastern border. Belshazzar partook in Babylon's defense against the invasion by Cyrus the Great in 539 BC after a decisive victory in the Battle of Opis, The Persian army on October 12th, led by Ubaru, entered Babylon without a fight. And the last tablet dated to Nabonidus' reign is from Uruk and is dated to 13th of October, which is considered the end date of his reign. Nabonidus was captured and possibly exiled to Carmania. Belshazzar's fate is not known since none of the sources record it, and it's often assumed that Belshazzar was killed by the Persians at Babylon when the city fell on the 12th of October. He may have alternatively been killed already at the Battle of Opus, captured and executed or exiled together with his father. Now, of course, when you have a secular source that's not biblical, they will always try to deny some of these stories in the Bible. But in the book of Daniel, Belshazzar, the son of Nabonidus, king of Babylon, plays a significant role in the tale of Belshazzar's feast, a variation on the story of Nebuchadnezzar's madness, showing what happens when a king does not repent. And during a feast, Babylonians eat and drink from the holy vessels of God's temple. And, quote, King Belshazzar sees a hand writing the words, Mene, Mene, Tekel Upharsin, on a wall. Daniel interprets the writing as a judgment from Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God of Israel, foretelling of the fall of Babylon. Belshazzar is the one who saw the writing on the wall, and he's the son of the king that was in the inscription that Josh Gates was dangling in front of. And no mention of this story is even in that documentary. Daniel tells Belshazzar, because he knew him, that because he has not given honor to God, that his kingdom will be given to the Medes and Persians. Belshazzar is killed that night, and Darius the Mede takes the kingdom. Belshazzar is portrayed as the king of Babylon and son of Nebuchadnezzar, though he was actually the son of Nabonidus, one of Nebuchadnezzar's successors, and he never became king in his own right, nor did he lead the religious festivals as the king was required to do. But we don't know what happened back in those days. There could have been some reason why he was put in place to do that festival, because obviously the Bible is historic fact and does not lie because it's the Word of God. And in the story of the conqueror who inherits Babylon is Darius the Mede, but no such individual is known to history, and the invaders were actually Persians. And this is typical of the tale of court contest, in which historical accuracy is not an essential element. Well, I beg to differ. You know, they always try to deny the Bible in every way, but that's not the point here, because we know that the Bible is true. And just the mere fact that Nabonidus is in this inscription of victory on this cliff face, and his son is Belshazzar, who knew Daniel, and Daniel interpreted the writing on the wall that condemned him, is unbelievable. And why was this story not told? Because it takes somebody like me who's going to investigate and find a connection. In the book of Daniel, Belshazzar is not malevolent. He rewards Daniel and raises him to high office. The later authors of the Talmud and the Midrash emphasize the tyrannous oppression of his Jewish subjects, with several passages in the prophets interpreted as referring to him and his predecessors. For example, in the passage, as if a man did flee from a lion and a bear met him in Amos 5:19. The lion is said to represent Nebuchadnezzar, and the bear, equally ferocious, if not equally courageous, is Belshazzar. The Babylonian kings are often mentioned together as forming a succession of impious and tyrannical monarchs who oppressed Israel and were therefore foredoomed to disgrace and destruction. Now, remember, King Charles III has all of these representing him. He has the lion, the leopard, the bear, and the dragon. And I believe Israel has made a gold crown to give to a certain king to be the next heir of Judah, while they have the crown prince of Persia come take his place, and he will make the Cyrus Accord decree that allows the Jews to build the third temple. And it's going to involve Britain, and it's going to involve the United States, because they were involved in the coup that overthrew the monarchy of Iran. And I told that history in my last video. So you have Donald Trump, who's pictured on the Cyrus coin. And you have the crown prince of Persia, who has said that he wants to do a Cyrus Accord with the Jews, and he was up on the Temple Mount praying with his wife, with Netanyahu and his wife. The Babylonian kings are often mentioned together as forming succession of impious and tyrannical monarchs who oppressed Israel and were therefore foredoomed by disgrace and destruction. Isaiah 14:22. And I will rise up against them, saith the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon name and remnant and son and grandchild, says the Lord, is applied to the trio named to Nebuchadnezzar, remnant, to Armel Marduk, son, to Belshazzar, and to grandchild Vashti. The command given to Abraham to cut in pieces 3 heifers in Genesis 15:9 as part of the covenant established between him and his God was thus elucidated as symbolizing Babylonia, which gave rise to 3 kings, Nebuchadnezzar, Amel Marduk, and Belshazzar, whose doom is prefigured by this act of cutting to pieces. Midrash Genesis Rabbah. The Midrash literature enters into the details of Belshazzar's death, and thus the later tradition states that Cyrus and Darius were employed as doorkeepers of the royal palace, Belshazzar being greatly alarmed at the mysterious handwriting on the wall. And by the way, he was so terrified that his knees were knocking together and his legs went slack, because that is putting the fear of God in someone. Let me say this again. Belshazzar, being greatly alarmed at the mysterious handwriting on the wall, and apprehending that someone in disguise might enter the palace with murderous intent, ordered his doorkeepers to slay anyone who attempted to force an entrance that night, even though such person should claim to be the king himself. Belshazzar, overcome by sickness, left the palace unobserved during the night through a rear exit, and on his return, the doorkeepers refused to admit him. In vain did he plead that he was the king. And they said, has not the king ordered us to put to death anyone who attempts to enter the palace, though he claims to be the king himself? Suiting the actions to the word, Cyrus and Darius grasped a heavy ornament forming part of the candelabrum, and with it shattered the skull of their royal master. And that is written in Shir HaSharim Rabbah 3:4, which I guess is a Jewish book, recording the history of Belshazzar and his end. And so I'll just end with this. The Persians had been growing in strength to the east under the leadership of Cyrus the Great, who soon led a military expedition to conquer Babylon in October of 539 after the Battle of Opis. The Persian army triumphantly entered the capital city of Babylon, and Babylonia was incorporated into the Persian Empire as a satrapy. And as recorded in the Cyrus Cylinder, Cyrus vowed to respect the Babylonian people. He also allowed exiled peoples to return to their homelands, including the captives from Judah. And he won the loyalty of the Babylonian elite and was viewed as the legitimate successor of the ancient Babylonian kings. And so, in the last days, what do you have there in Jerusalem? Mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots. And these kings that will be set upon the throne, when Israel chooses a king of Judah, and they gift him that crown, that's a rider on the white horse, because, as I've told you, the king has a white horse that rides out and blows a trumpet and announces the king's arrival. And King Charles III has that white horse with the trumpeter. And that rider does ride out and announce that King Charles has arrived to the area. And that lets the people know he's there. So you've got the UK and the US. You got King Charles III. You'll have Donald Trump, who's on the Cyrus coin. And you'll have the restoration of the Crown Prince of Persia, who has said he's going to make the Cyrus Accord with the Jews. And that Cyrus Accord, centuries ago, allowed the Jews to build the temple. And this is how it's going to go down. So you're going to be seeing this battle that's going on right now is going to end with the death of the tyrannical leaders that have been in power in Iran, terrorizing for nearly 45 years. And that's just astonishing. So anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Please give a like, and I really could use some support on this channel. And they've been freezing my videos, so they only get to a certain point of views and then they stop. So it's pretty tyrannical in itself. So I thought this would be very interesting to you, and I would have been kind of like freaked out that inscription said King of Babylon, realizing that Belshazzar is the one whose kingdom came to an end by the handwriting on the wall, written by the finger of God. Wow. And this is all going to come together in the last days there in Jerusalem on Holy Mount Moriah. Pretty stunning. And if you want to read about the King of Kings and some astonishing truths about him, my book, The Almond Tree, Aaron's Rod, The Messiah, King of Israel, is available at Olive Press Publisher and many of the online bookstores. Best place is the publisher, though, olivepresspublisher.com. God bless. I'll see you the next time.